This is Dead Stick Radio, episode 13, recorded live on Thursday, June 4th, 2020. ADSB privacy and fighter pilots.
Canadian, the best kind. We thought he would be a good guest on the podcast today because he recently converted his rocket. Is it F1 rocket or Harmon rocket?
It's an F1 rocket.
Yeah, so he converted the panel and modernized it significantly, including installing ADSB, G3X, I think you put in it, a bunch of other equipment.
Yeah, so I got, I had an old Dynon D10, which is like a small attitude indicator, EFIS, which was great. But after last year, almost getting stuck a couple times at places I wanted to do an upgrade IFR. So we put dual Garmin G3X panel. They're all touchscreen. And then I put, because of Canadian rules, we need to have dual independent navigation. So I put a VOR LS with COM, and I put a Garmin GNX 375, which is the new navigator. It's a GPS, LPV, WAS capable. And it's got a ADSB Mode S transponder all in one box. And then I added another radio just because I do some formation work, and you typically need two radios for that. And then after that, just added some Gucci equipment like autopilot and engine monitoring instrument just to be a little bit more up to date. So it was an extensive job, and it's a shop out of Chilliwack that did it, and they did like a fabulous work with it. So there's a lot of new gear, and I know that you and I had that discussion, and even as an experienced pilot, you know, and I'm used to flying aircraft that have some quite advanced systems with radar and sensors and weaponry, and, you know, you're flying in formation. The new kit is actually what we call in the military a drool cup. You know, it gets your eyes inside the cockpit, and you forget sometimes where you need to focus. And with my experience, I can say I keep telling myself to look outside, but for new pilots, I would caution them sometimes that those brand new gear can definitely bring your focus at the wrong location.
Well, let's back up for anybody listening and explain to them kind of the backstory behind our conversation previously. So there have been several conversations, many of them online, especially in the Alberta area, it seems, where people have had near misses. They're losing their situational awareness. They're not looking outside as much as they should be, making the V and VFR. And we're seeing things like overcomplicated airspace and more complicated airspace being made to try and solve some of these near miss midairs. So when Erick upgraded his panel, we were having a conversation over what that meant and how that affected his ability to fly, whether it increased his SA or decreased it. So that's kind of the background behind this, and it seems to be fairly contentious out there right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of us were lucky that when we started flying with some very, very basic equipment. I started flying with a glider. So really, I had a little string in front of me telling me what was the ball doing, you know?
Right.
And I didn't have engine to worry about. Everything was, you know, some sort of feeling in the controls, how the lift is affecting my aircraft and speed and wind noise, and then I eventually, you know, moved on to bigger and better aircraft. We talked about situation awareness, and the problem is that, you know, sometimes the gear that you add in your cockpit doesn't always increase your situation awareness. Situation awareness, really, it's like it's knowing what just went on, to be able to see what's going on right now, to be able to predict what's going to go on next. And often I think what I find, and I've seen that in a lot of new pilots, their focus is inside the cockpit, and they forget to pay attention. You know, you say the V and the VFR, and it's true.
The VFR is visual flight rules for anybody who's not a pilot. It's flying with reference to the ground and navigational points on the ground, that kind of thing.
So when you're flying IFR and you're flying it, strictly by the reference of the instruments, it's great because the kit is all in front of you. But VFR, you kind of cross-check the instrumentation inside your cockpit to be able to fly effectively, but you don't want to forget to look outside, And I think a lot of people stay so much inside the cockpit, and we've had some mid-air collision of people like flying basically, same altitude, almost the same direction, hitting each other, and that's because people are now looking outside. So as an experienced pilot, I do find that even with my level of experience, I do tend to have my attention diverted to looking inside the cockpit. So I have to really focus on paying attention to what's going on out there.
Right. So would you say then at a basic level, the difference between VFR visual flight rules and IFR instrument flight rules is essentially giving up some freedom to be allowed to safely fly inside clouds and in weather conditions that are not conducive to VFR, which is flying outside, by looking outside?
I'm not sure what you mean by letting go some freedom, because honestly, it also increases my freedom if I can fly through clouds and go places. But
well, it's straight line. You're flying flight planned with ATC, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's more regimented.
Right, that's maybe a better word.
Regulated, and it's a little bit of a teamwork exercise versus you flying on your own. Yep. You have the air traffic controller, you have your equipment, you have yourself, versus just man and machine. It's a little bit more involved, and definitely it's very, very procedural. So if everybody follows the same procedure, it's quite safe, and you got a lot of people out there involved. The different control center. I'm not sure I would say that it removes some of that freedom. It's just a very different type of flying. If we're visually flying out there, it's the sensor exposure is very different. I look at the ground, I'm getting close to the ground, versus the other one is all based on my instruments.
Right. So what you did is you upgraded your panel to give yourself more equipment to allow you to fly instrument flight rules. But what you're finding is the added information in the cockpit is sucking your eyes in.
Yeah, I would not disagree with that. It definitely brings my attention. And like I said, sometimes on the F-18, we have our students, we call that the drool cup, because the guys are just there looking at the equipment and not paying attention to what goes on either the other sensors or outside. And definitely the more equipment you put in, the more finger poking you got to go in. Even just a simple radio, where if it's that's a tactile radio where there's a knob and you're rotating the knob, that's why for me, my main radio, I wanted to have one that has a switch where I could rotate and feel. Because if I'm flying formation, I can change those, and without paying too much attention on the inside of the radio, kind of do a couple click, look, do a couple click, and there we are. When you're actually touching digital display, you have to spend a lot more attention to that display and where you're putting your finger. So your attention is actually more in the cockpit.
To operate the system.
Exactly. But even the instrumentation, coming from having a standard 6-pack, or even flying the F-18 with the head-up display, the new instrumentation with the strips offer you an amazing amount of information, but sometimes it's almost too much information that now it detracts you from where to look. If I look at a VSI and the VSI is like this, I know I'm climbing. If I know I'm looking at VSI, it's going down, I know I'm going down. The new displays have more analysis required, because they're not as graphical. Unless you put in you can change a G3X into a 6-pack, but it's just a different presentation of the information, and you kind of have to get used to it.
I know. I feel
that makes
it's
sense.
kind of the same thing on my plane. My plane's it's just got those standard steam gauges. You get a real feel where that gauge is. What's over here, I'm close to stalling. It's over here, I'm close to overheating. I can quickly glance over without having to think much. Whereas on a digital display, I don't have a lot of experience flying digital like thousands or anything, but just looking over at those, it's a lot more to kind of read and go, okay, now I have to think about that number I just saw, and start to just about the spatial awareness.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like purely looking at a clock. You know, the two needles are up. It's, either midnight or 12 o'clock, versus looking at numbers and analyzing those numbers. Now, the younger generation are born with those digital displays, so their brain is more adaptable. But the older folks, have to readapt to newer technology, I guess.
So between your military displays, your G3X, and your steam gauge background, for a new pilot, what would you recommend for learning? Would you recommend the steam gauges or the new style digital displays?
Oh, that's going to be that's a big debate, and I've had that debate many times. I wish, this is just my philosophy on this. I wish that if you started flying, that the first 10, 20 hours there was no digital display. That's just me. Just because I want the attention to the pilot to be learning about attitudes and outside references. I know that if my nose is pointing down, I'm going to start to accelerate. I'm going to lose altitude. And having those references based on all these different aircraft, I've flown lots of different aircraft. And every time I go to a new aircraft, when I'm sitting in the front seat, before I take off, I look around the cockpit. I go, okay, the horizon right now in this particular attitude when I'm in the ground is cutting, the canopy at this location. Or as I'm climbing and have a certain speed, I will look at where the propeller cone is, reference the horizon. Maybe there's like 2 fingers between the horizon and the nose, So yes. Those are, you want the pilot to start learning about attitude flying versus continuously cross-checking the instrument to get that. Because if you don't give him that foundation, that's my philosophy. If you don't give him that foundation initially to look outside, it's going to be very difficult, doing it later. You've probably heard about it, the law of primacy. The first thing you learn is critical, and it's important that you teach that person that very basic foundation to look outside and learn these references.
Yeah, I found that too. When I was doing my private license way back when, my instructor, we had some time to kill to get to that the minimum hour requirement, and so he decided to cover up all of the instruments on me and then have me land like that. So that really taught me and my brain how to fly the airplane, not just fly the instruments. I found. If that makes sense.
And it's funny you say that because I just changed all my airspeed to knots. Because I used to fly all in miles per hour. So when I picked up the airplane, the avionics guy had changed everything to knots. But honestly, because I'm so used to flying my airplane, I'm just looking outside. I have a certain line of sight, things the way they're moving, how fast they're moving. I look down, I'm exactly at the speed I should be. So typically I would fly my airplane at about 100 miles an hour coming in for the approach. I look down, I got 85 knots. I'm like, so that's where that foundation is critical when you know how things are moving. And we teach that on with our F-18 pilots because there's so much magic in front of you that sometimes when the guys go from flying a normal airplane to flying the F-18, they get caught up to just looking at the head-up display, the velocity vector, and all the magic around it, and they forget how things are moving very fast towards you. So maybe you should raise the nose up and flare a bit. The outside references are critical, especially on takeoff and landing.
Yeah, I find too when I end up in a sticky situation or in a situation where I get really busy in the cockpit, somebody cut me off on approach, I don't know, something like that, and I have to make some urgent corrections or maneuvering. It can all happen without ever looking in the cockpit, and I'll never have a problem with airspeed or anything because I know my airplane so well.
Yeah.
So it seems like the same idea.
So, but I agree. I mean, like also when I started flying, we used to have these little soap cups, with these little suction cup in the back. And my instructor would just hide different instrument once, one at a time. And I started losing, the instruments or going partial panel. And basically you had to rely more and more looking outside and picking up the different cues out there.
Yep.
I think it would not be a bad idea for pilots to learn on the very basic, but ultimately also we have to embrace the new technology. And there's a lot of new technology out there that makes our job a lot easier. I mean, I'm flight planning on an iPad. I go to my airplane and I just ship everything to my GPS. I never touched a button. I can't say that that's a bad thing. There's a lot of really good kit. Like my kit right now, if I get a traffic coming in, it will tell me traffic. It tells me minimum. It tells me overshoot. It helps me a lot. So I think you have to embrace the new technology. And I know we've had a couple of debates on some of the forums there with the 406 ELT versus the 121.5, the ADSB. But I mean, I just picked up the plane and I could not believe the traffic I was seeing on my ADSB, which those were beyond visual range. And I'm like, oh, there's a traffic at this location, 1 o'clock, 12 miles.
Yeah. Let's talk about that right now, because that's a good one. So are you familiar with how the ADSB systems work? I'm less familiar.
Yeah, no, I'm familiar. We got a ground-based system and a satellite-based system. The U.S. decided to do the ground-based station, the UAT, the 978, especially for the general aviation, to get them on board. And making it cheap for them to basically think of it as a XM weather-like system where you got weather, you got FISB, but you got also traffic available. So that's why they came up with the system to entice the general aviation to get on board. The civilian industry was going to get on board one way or the other. Now,
can we back up for a minute? So what does ADSB stand for the people out there that are unfamiliar? New pilots, that kind of thing.
Oh, now you just caught me by
is it automatic dependent?
Yeah, automatic broadcast.
Automatic dependent surveillance with broadcast. So there's another version of it, ADSV. But yeah, broadcast is the big one. That's in everyone's planes now.
Right. So what it does is it's kind of like a modern transponder that broadcasts your location and aircraft information to anybody that wants to look at it, including online websites.
That's correct.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Could be anyone. But the important people are, say, you can see other Cessnas or whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit more involved in there too. There's a portion where you can get weather and different kind of information. Then there's traffic. There's FISB and there's TSB, which are traffic or basically forecast based information that can be sent to you. In Canada, we're looking more of the traffic information being the main issue.
Right.
So right now, my kit for me has the dual link. So I got both 978 and 1090. So what I saw, I didn't see any weather when I was flying Canada. I don't think I'm going to see that for the foreseeable future. But when I go to the States, I anticipate I'll be able to see that.
Right, Brian, is that called diversity?
Well, yes. So the diversity antennas are the dual antennas, one for the ground stations and one for the sky stations. The reality is both those antennas can pretty much receive both of them. It's just it gets a better coverage with that. But yeah, the weather information, that's available via the broadcast stations in the States. So if you're really close to the border or in kind of southern Ontario, you'll actually get weather information. But up where we are, up in kind of middle northern Alberta, or where you are in really northern Alberta up there, you don't get any of that information. It's not broadcast from those ground stations, so we can't get that information. And unfortunately, one of the glitches with ForeFlight is that, which is what I use. I have an ADSB receiver. I don't have any ADSB out, but with the ADSB receiver, if you connect to that, it then disables internet weather. So it's either I get traffic information or I get weather information, but not both at the same time, which is kind of frustrating on the ForeFlight side of things.
Right. So the law right now in the U.S. requires ADSB. It's mandated inside of 25 or 50 nautical miles of Bravo airspace or something. Do you know the rule, Eric?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ones, but anything that's over 10,000 feet right now. So if you're within 2,000 feet of the ground, so let's say you're close to the mountains, you're somewhat protected by that. Anything that's over 10,000, and then within pretty much any of the controlled airspace, otherwise you're going to need that. There's some pretty good site out there with some information. Outside of that, you don't need really the ADSB. So I can almost go from here all the way to Portland without requiring ADSB.
Right. And then I think there's also a rule exempting aircraft without an electrical system from flying inside some of those ADSB zones.
Yeah, I'm not positive, and I'm not sure how long that's going to stay like that too. But
yeah, I agree. And then in Canada, there is no requirement for ADSB in controlled zones yet, although it's likely coming.
They just didn't they just they either announced it or just implemented it. Where above 18,000 you're requiring it, and then shortly it's going to be above 12,000. You're going to be required to have that ADSB, and it's going to be the diversity. And then there's talk about it being in lower space in the future, but they haven't set any kind of dates or any kind of parameters on.
So according to what I saw on Nav Canada, basically in February 2021, which is really less than a year from now, anything that's in Class A or over 18,000 feet, you're going to need the ADSB. And then in January, February of 2022, it's going to be anything that's over 12,500. So more or less Class B airspace.
Yeah.
Because I think they would have a difficult time to enforce, uncontrolled airspace over 12.5, just like up north, for instance, unless they make it mandatory everywhere over 12.5. And then in 2023, that's when the general aviation may be targeted to start getting it.
Right, for control zones and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
That's according to Nav Canada.
Right. So the downside of that is all those farmers and so on out there with basic Piper Cubs, basic airplanes like that, need to pay for an install of a new electronic device, including antenna, which it could be more straightforward, but it could also be worse, I guess.
So let's just clarify one thing for people listening. There's ADSB out and there's ADSB in.
Right.
The mandatory is ADSB out. They need you to mandatory broadcast where you are, where you're going.
And who you are.
They don't care if you see anybody else. They just want you to broadcast your location. So my kit has ADSB in and out and on a dual link. So I should be able to see pretty much everybody that is within that airspace. So there's a couple of different systems out there available. There's even a company out of Montana, in Kalispell, Montana, avionics. It's a very simple system, and now they just came out with a dual link, which will also do the 978, the UAT, and will do the 1090 megahertz. And it's basically you take your tail light out of your cassette and you replace it with that.
Yeah, I don't have any lights.
You don't have that lights. So the only thing though is at that point that system is attached to your nav light. So if you turn off your nav lights, then you've just turned off. You've just gone incognito in your ADSB. But the system is meant also for general aviation aircraft like a Cessna 172, a Piper Archer or something like that. A very simple thing, and it's minutes to install it, and it's all Bluetooth. You do it all with your phone.
So there is no receiver or equipment required to install in the panel.
Nope.
That's probably an additional feature if you want it.
Yeah, that is only if you want the ADSB in. Now, if you want the ADSB in, there's a couple different options also out there, which is Well, he's got, so that's the Stratex, is it?
Yep, the Stratex with the X. I also have the Stratus 2, and then there's also the other big one is the I can't even remember the name of it now. It's much smaller. GDL? Yeah.
So the Stratex is the knockoff version of the Stratus, and that will give you the WAS requirement, and it receives all the ADSB in information, which will give you the traffic. And I suspect that you have that right onto your iPad.
Yeah, it comes right into ForeFlight.
That's pretty slick for just that box.
And I think, I correct me if I'm wrong, that little unit is something like $220, $230, and you can buy out Spruce. And
yeah, these ones are really, really cheap. They're based on the Raspberry Pi, which is a little microcomputer that you can buy and do a lot of little microcomputer type of things. But the Stratex and the GDL and the other one as well, those ones are a lot more fully integrated systems where they have battery packs in them. They're a lot more solid and reliable, whereas this one's a little bit more kind of janky, I guess.
So Eric, you put the Garmin based ADSB in your airplane, right?
Yeah.
That plugs into the G3X?
Yeah, so it's a one unit. It's a Garmin 375. So it's a WAS GPS LPV capable of doing IFR approaches and so on. And the unit also has, instead of being a NavCom, it's a nav transponder. So it's got an ADSB transponder in it.
That's slick.
So, and yeah, it just feeds the information through my G3X touch display. So if I go to the traffic page, I can see the traffic, and there's different kind of nomenclature of what the traffic is, either a ground-based traffic, a traffic that's within a certain altitude or distance of your location, a little bit like a TCAS, a terminal collision avoidance system.
Yep.
It'll tell you, it'll change the different colors when there's a traffic advisory, or there's now it requires you to do a certain maneuver to avoid the traffic, like a resolution advisory. So the system is capable of seeing the vector and giving you more warning about it.
Do you find, now that you used it a bit, do you find that you find yourself relying on the ADSB in for traffic avoidance? Are you no. Reducing your visual lookout at all, or do you still feel like it's more of a help than a hindrance?
No, at this time I would say it's definitely more help than hindrance. That's for sure. I think the rest of the kit is bringing up my attention. But as ATC, I just went by Edmonton last weekend, and as the Edmonton terminal was telling me where the traffic was, it was right displayed there. So it was beyond my visual range at that point, but it did give me a good comfort that I had it on my display. It was exactly where he called it up, and then I wasn't concerned. I would still continue looking outside, but I definitely think it's a good piece of gear to have.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've flown with a couple people though that seem to rely on the ADSB in for traffic avoidance, and they start sacrificing some of their lookout, which is probably back to that whole jewel cup that you were talking about earlier. Is that something that you can see happening frequently?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things in the cockpit right now, just like driving, that are bringing your attention
in instead of out.
From outside. And honestly, I may say I may have been guilty to maybe, changing some music on my phone or looking inside the cockpit at something on the iPad. Even just the iPad with the ForeFlight is another sensor that you're adding within the cockpit environment that's adding to the additional, time away from looking outside. So you got the iPad, you got a different display, you got the different radios, you got potentially your phone that you're trying to get music. Yep. So It's just people have to just pay attention, and also when people are looking out, a lot of people haven't really learned properly how to do a lookout, because the eye doesn't catch when you go very quickly and do a lookout. You're supposed to scan the skies fairly quickly. You can't just look left to right quickly and expect that you're going to see everything. Especially the more concerning target is the one that's not moving. Because the target that's not moving is the hardest one to pick up, and it's the most dangerous one because you're going to be colliding with it.
So you're the professional dogfighter here. What do you train or teach your students in the jets for lookout and traffic avoidance? Is there a procedure that you use or a technique?
I would say that overall, when I do my lookout, I don't do a lookout for more than 30 degrees. So when I say 30 degrees, so I'll do my lookout, from 12 to 1 o'clock. Then I'll go 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and then so on. With the rocket, I don't tend to be too concerned of people on my 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock, because I'm going fairly quick, that they're going to be behind me fairly schnell. Yeah. But I don't do a broad lookout very quickly. I kind of look at the sky, and I start far, and I start walking my eyes towards me. So I kind of bounce between, let's say, the 12 to the 1 o'clock, kind of bounce my eyes, and I bring my eyes closer to my airplane. And then I do the exact same thing from the 1 o'clock to the 2 o'clock position, and I kind of bounce my eyes between the 30 degrees to 60 degrees as I get closer. If you just broad brush, I guess, your lookout, you're going to miss a lot of things. And for us, especially in our line of work, you can't fight what you can't see. And if you lose sight, you lose the fight. So we need to make sure we stay visual at all time, with visual or tally with the target.
Right. Yeah. I find all of the near misses I've had when it comes to near miss midairs come from the airplanes right on the horizon. And I find that contrast between light and dark makes airplanes hide really well. And the smaller the airplane, the harder to see, especially when they're pointed right at you.
Yeah, for sure. If they needle nose you got less aspect, and it's going to be more difficult to see.
Yeah, I know in my little tiny racing airplane, we find that rocking the wings, if ATC is asking another airplane if they have visual on you, we find rocking the wings can help with that awareness, and it kind of shows our profile better to the airplanes looking for us.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that.
Yeah, instead of the head on.
I actually had a couple incidents here when I was doing just after I bought my plane. The first one, we were flying around Lake Muskoka, where there's a lot of other float planes that fly around up there, bringing people out to their cabins and whatnot. And sure enough, both me and my instructor were doing our lookouts there, and he didn't see a plane. I did, and he was coming right at us, and they wasn't moving, and they weren't on the radio. No one was talking, and we kind of reasonably narrowly missed them just because we climbed out of there. But that could have ended up fairly badly. We would have seen them had we had ADSB on us or on them, at least, or if we both had ADSB. Another instance, coming back from all the way from Ontario, we were flying back, or I was flying back myself, and I had ForeFlight up and running. I had ADSB coming in, and suddenly I saw a little ping ahead of me saying there's a plane coming straight at me, 2,000-3,000 feet below me, ascending. And I couldn't, obviously I couldn't see them where they were. I would never have seen them if they were just flying straight at me. And they were on a different radio frequency. They were actually taking off from an airport straight ahead. So because of that, I was able to, through ForeFlight, just tap on it and, figure out what the radio frequency was, call them up, and sure enough, they were taking off, coming in my direction. Moved out of the way, and if I hadn't moved out of the way, they flew effectively ascending right through where I would have been flying through, and that would have definitely been a very close call. But because I saw them, I was able to move out of the way and stay out of there. So to me, as a collision avoidance system, it's you can be looking out as much as you want, but the reality is having that extra information is enough to potentially prevent some certain conflicts.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Your eyesight can only see so much, and you got some good examples there. I was in a place last summer. I went camping with my airplane on the Oregon Gorge, and it was a little tiny airport called Cascade Locks. So I take off, and I'm broadcasting in my radio, and as I'm turning downwind, I got a canopy, so I got no covering over top of me. I can see, very, very good visual. Nobody was on the radio, but I see the shadow of an airplane going over the water, and my heart just sunk. And I'm like, where is this thing? And I looked everywhere, and it wasn't until he passed my 3 o'clock that I actually saw him, and he was within 300 feet of the pattern altitude, not talking to anybody. And honestly, if in this case, for instance, with the ADSB, I would have known before even taking off that aircraft was there. And I was broadcasting on radio. I was within the pattern of an airport, broadcasting my intention. And what caught my eye was the shadow of what looked to be like a high wing Cessna style airplane, just because I could see the square shape of the rectangular shape of the wings. And still that person never talked on the radio the whole time. So that would be an instance where, the ADSB would have helped.
You do a lot of military flying, and in the military, I'm guessing that kind of equipment exists and has existed for a while. Is some kind of software or display that broadcasts the whole environment. Is that true?
Well,
you might not be able to talk about it.
No. We have a radar. So my radar is basically effectively the same thing as what your terminal controller is looking at. I have my radar that has a certain azimuth and elevation that I can move. And we have also interrogators. So the same thing as what the air traffic controller is able to check. Because if I want to intercept somebody, let's say in the Vancouver area, and there's hundreds of tracks there, it's very difficult for me to see which one is who. And then my cursor is going to be moving all over the place. So there's equipment that we can have that we can interrogate a specific code, and then it cleans up the entire picture except that one person that's squawking that code. That's on the interrogator side. But we also have a radar like any fighter aircraft, modern fighters, and it's basically just raw energy that we're sending, and then it's pinging off the aircraft coming back to me, and I'm seeing some raw hits from that target. So we can maneuver our radar to look different location, both in azimuth and elevation. It's not so much of a TCAS per se, but it's got its own onboard radar, so we don't need that.
Do you have some kind of digital battlefield management system that broadcasts the whole situation?
Well, actually, so we called it a situation awareness page. So we call it an essay page.
Yeah.
And what we have is a data link that's broadcasted between all the players. So we have either within all the friendlies in the air and also the friendlies on the ground are all within one data link system. Think of it as an internet network, and we're able to broadcast everything that we see to the other aircraft, and the same thing what they see to us. So that increases the situation awareness, and that's why we call it the essay page. And it's a God's eye view. Think of your HSI, so your horizontal situation indicator, a God's eye view, but now you have all the targets or the friendlies
lit up.
Right on top of it.
Right. So that would give you the whole picture, including where the tankers are, where the rest of your formation is, that kind of thing, right? And who not to shoot.
Well, exactly. No, I 100% agree. And to a certain extent, the ADSB does provide you that
same thing,
of that kind of information, because when you're thinking of the ground radar that's from the air traffic controller, it's feeding that information through the ADSB. So yeah, it's a cheap man's version of what we have if you want to increase your SA.
Right, that makes sense. Do you use any civilian equipment in that airplane, or is it all military hardware?
I use an iPad.
Really? ForeFlight?
Well, yeah, ForeFlight. The military now has ForeFlight and iPads. You got to remember, like for the alert facility, the F-18, we cover from the West Coast, so BC, all the way to the western side of Ontario, all the way to the Atlantic, and all the northern states. So you talk about North Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Washington. So imagine the amount of publication I need to carry in my airplane that I could be at any moment given in time having to go that location. So I need, like approach plate from Washington. I need approach plates from North Dakota. I need approach plate, all the approach plates from BC, Prairies, Ontario, all the way to Inuvik. So the iPad, I touch a page now and I got it all.
How did it work before iPads existed? You just carry all these approach plates in some locker?
I have like an armrest of publication.
What was that like having to find the right publication, like amongst like 20 or 30 of them, and then find the right page?
That is why. Have you never realized that those little booklets have like 3 bars on top or 4 bars?
Yeah.
That's exactly what they're for. You look down, you go like, oh, I need the 3-bar one because it's the prairies. Or prairies, I think it's 4. But yeah, that's how you get to know them. But yeah, the iPad has been a huge improvement for us, both because of the reduction of weight, the increased size, available within the cockpit. But even if we do some intercepts, we can take some pictures with the iPad. And well, we need that, and then and also the SA dot, to be able to show when you're flying where you are, reference that that routing or the approach plate that increases your SA also.
Do you navigate off the iPad or do you navigate off the airplane systems?
No, we have a full functioning FMS system that's been designed and built basically on a Challenger 604. So it's almost the same nomenclature as far as the colors, the magenta, the cyan, green, the yellows, all the different fields are all the same. It increased the capability navigation wise of the F-18 a great amount. And actually the F-18 was the first fighter in the world to have a full functioning FMS. Now all the other fighters are all getting on board with it now. Is it
so when you navigate, you just dial in where you want to go, and then it draws the pink line kind of thing, like a Garmin, or you enter in like the coordinates on the INS system, or how's it work?
No, so we have an EGI, so it's a combined GPS INS, and so our GPS itself is or the EGI. Our kit, the FMS, is an MSO 145 versus most of the GPS unit out there that you have. They're either a TSO 145 or a TSO 129. So if you recall, the TSO 129 is more of the older generation GPS, which you needed to do the rain prediction if you went somewhere, versus the TSO 145 has rain monitoring. And has the WASP capability. So any of the TSO 145 has WASP. So if you understand the WASP principle, is basically a satellite-based.
It's more accurate GPS.
Yeah, it's basically it has ground-based station that knows the errors of that location, and it feeds that to your GPS.
Right.
Now, the F-18 works a little bit differently. We have 2 different signals, one signal to tell us our position, and then the other signal to be able to calculate the different, errors based on ionos, time errors or ionospheric errors or things that can affect the signal, weather, and so on. And then basically when it comes back, it gives us that error correction. So we don't have a WASP capable unit, but we have an equivalent, which gives us the ability to still do LNAV approach and so on, and fully functioning FMS. So we have, you can set up a departure, a full pilot navigation departure, do your en route. If you type in, and it's all HOTASable, so it's all on a throttle and stick system. So basically, you can put all the letters, A, B, C intersection, it'll come up. We have a similar system as a normal GPS where you have a nearest function. So we have a page that we call emergency function. And at a page, we can set up different length of runway, different approach, or even cables. So if I say I want cable, well, obviously in Alberta, it's only going to show me Cold Lake as an airport.
Yeah, but if you're in Southern California, you've got 5 options. Exactly.
So, but that might be something critical for a fighter where on the F-18, for instance, if we lose the right engine, that brings in a whole set of issues where you have no more brakes, no more nozzle steering, and your emergency gear has to come down. So that's why we typically do an arrested landing on those. So having that on the emergency page and be able to go nearest, cable, and then it shows me all the airports from closest to farthest, that helps.
So all of those systems, to me, like with the HOTAS and everything, the hands-on throttle and stick, and the HUD and everything are designed to bring your head back out of the cockpit.
I 100% agree. So one thing that the military does very well, we train from the beginning. We know our checks by heart, and we don't spend a great amount of time looking at the checklist when we're doing our startup, when we're taxing. We have very regimented checks, even our combat checks and so on. And then when it comes to the systems, you're right, the hands-on and throttle and stick system, the reason why they're there is so that you can operate most of the systems without having to bring your eyes in and push buttons. Because every time you bring your eyes in, you're trying to look out, you may now lose that target. And like I said, you lose sight, you lose the fight.
Right, that makes sense to me. So you said you don't use a checklist at all, really, like a paper checklist?
So now
from
we don't
startup to shutdown?
Nope. No,
That's
we don't
the way
use,
it should be.
So we don't use a checklist. We know it all by heart. But everything we do, even when I bought my F1 rocket, as simple as it sounds, I created my checklist based on the flow. So a flow is how you move about the cockpit. So the F-18 is very easy. How you go from the left to the right, you turn everything off. And then you go from right to left and you turn everything on once you've started. So everything, has a certain way of doing it. But yeah, on any aircraft that I've flown in the military, pretty much, you need to know your checklist by heart. Now, the only time that the checklist is pretty much mandatory is whenever it's an emergency procedure and it's not a mandatory bold item. So we have red pages, yellow pages. The red pages need to be known by heart. Those are memory item. Those are bold item. Yep. And once you've done those, then you revert to the yellow pages now where it's either non-critical emergency or you've done the critical portion of that emergency. And now it's the follow-on actions.
So does that philosophy then scale up into multi-engine transport, or do those get more complicated than it's worth?
Yeah, it's not my world, but I would say they have an entire crew to deal with that versus for us, we're a single pilot in our aircraft. Right. So we, to be more efficient and quicker, we need to know these things by heart.
Right. That makes sense to me. What do you think, Brian? Do you have any other questions about the F-18?
No, it's super interesting, but I don't really think I have any questions. Well, I guess how long does it take you? You said you go all the way to what, North Dakota down there. How long does it take you from Cold Lake to get to North Dakota if you had to be there in like an absolute emergency?
Well, or say intercepting up north.
Yeah, you can go very fast, but very fast doesn't mean you're going to go for very long. Just because the faster we go, the more we burn gas. So, the range without going into into the greater details of the capabilities. The airplane will fly, fairly easily about 900 miles, and then we are going to start to need gas. So if your target is beyond 900 miles, there's no points in going so super fast there because you're not going to be able to do anything there. So, depending on the location where we go, we need to have air refuelers, which are a great extender of our capabilities. And but if I want to go from, let's say, from Cold Lake to Calgary, we're talking about somewhere around 35 minutes or so.
Pretty fast.
Typically, just a typical cruising speed for us is about 480. That's 480 true air speed. That's your normal cruise speed. And then we have two different other speed that we can cruise at, which, obviously increases the speed, but also the fuel burn. So it's either 480, 510, 540. Those are typical of the speed that we cruise at.
What's that? Okay.
So you're looking at about 0.86, 0.90, and 0.93 or so. Right.
So, and then when you take it out over the water, you can push it up even more into the supersonic range, right?
Yeah, there's different location where we can go supersonic. There's over the water west. There's different military airspace, but we're not going to go supersonic into civilian airspace without due cause.
Yeah, I don't think it's legal either, is it?
Well, it would be legal if I have to intercept somebody and there's an urgency to it, but I'm not going to do that if it's not required.
Right, that makes sense.
Is supersonic flight part of your training up there? Do you have to go supersonic is in your training program?
I'm not going to lie to you. It's a little bit anticlimactic. It's not like back in the days where the entire aircraft shakes. And the F-18, I hate to say it, but the F-18 is a slow airplane compared to other fighters out there. The Viper, the F-16, or the F-15, or even the newer generation, the F-35, the F-22 are extremely fast. Acceleration wise, the top end is about the same, but the acceleration is much faster. And when you go through the sound barrier, I'm not going to lie to you, it's like you're driving 100 kilometers an hour in your vehicle, and suddenly you're driving 110. You didn't even look. You're going, I'm over the limit, So you don't typically feel it going through. You feel it sometimes coming through on the way down because there's a little bit of a tuck, but it's very, very mild. And depending on the configuration that you have, if you're really dirty, if you have multiple tanks, or if you're clean, you can pretty much just bunt the nose over and you can easily bust
blow it.
There. Yeah,
you probably get in trouble for that.
Hey,
you probably get in trouble for that.
Yeah, they're not too happy about that usually.
But do they know?
Well, they can hear it sometimes, especially during the winter. If it's during the winter and depending on the direction where you are, the flight path direction that you have, the sound will carry more. I don't know if you heard a helicopter during the winter or a helicopter during the summer. It just has that very crisp, loud sound during the winter.
Yeah.
The sound barrier during the winter is a lot. It carries further. The air is more dense and
boom.
Yeah. So we've had sonic boom here in Cold Lake at night where the entire house shook, and we thought initially was an earthquake, and it wasn't. It was just the direction of flight of that aircraft, the time of the day, and so on. It just carried the way it did.
Right. So it was a high wavelength boom that felt more like an earthquake.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So that was that kind of got me thinking. So with ADSB now, let's talk about the privacy and the that kind of thing with it. So there's some stigma behind ADSB and some people that are somewhat against the implementation, particularly in the US, because it hasn't really affected Canada yet, behind the ability to, or the privacy behind it, or the lack thereof. People find now that other people or their competitors, for example, know exactly where they are as soon as they get in their airplane. I'm sure celebrities will have that problem. Other people can see where the celebrity's plane is at any time. And then also, it's a lot easier for the FAA and the police type figures out there to know when you made a mistake or you buzzed your friend or something like that. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I don't seem to have a concern with it, just because I look at the advantages and disadvantage. And I think, honestly, we're being monitored everywhere we go. So, I go to Edmonton. It's hard for me to go to Edmonton and not get some sort of red light ticket or speeding ticket.
But is that right?
Because they have the cameras everywhere. I don't seem to have a concern with it myself. But I can see some people having, the issue with privacy. At this time, for me, I believe I gain more than I lose. But I can see their concern.
Well, I believe you can get. I believe you can get around it, especially the anonymity problem, by registering your airplane in somewhere like the Cayman Islands, where the aircraft registry is not public domain. So that solves that problem, at least.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm going to go and register my aircraft there for that. But now I was talking about there's different things that are available within the kit, and I'm not absolutely familiar with it. So my kit, I have an option to go anonymous, but I believe it's illegal for me while in the States when I'm within a controlled environment. If they've given me a squawk, I cannot go anonymous. But if I am within the uncontrolled airspace or within ADSB airspace and I have not been given a discrete squawk, I don't see the reason why I cannot use that anonymous. So what the anonymous do, it doesn't make you invisible. You're still there. But what it does is it removes the data that's attached to your aircraft. It kind of hides that as far as the information package is being sent.
That makes sense to me, having that option available in case somebody has a situation where they want it. But I agree with you that flying in controlled airspace, it should not be used, because that's what ATC is using, right?
Yeah, ultimately, let's be honest. I can go on 24 radar or whatever it's called and multiple sites, and I can put your aircraft registration. And if you're going through the Edmonton control area, I will see your airplane.
With a mode C or with ADSB?
No, I'm talking about with a mode C. If they've given you a discrete squawk, I'm going to see you.
I didn't know that. I thought it was only ADSB.
No, because they're able to provide that information through the ADSB.
Yeah, they're rebroadcasting that through their ground stations. I don't remember if it's just within Canada or if they were doing that in the States as well. But yeah, they've been doing that here in Canada. In the States, they were actually rebroadcasting Mode C into ADSB in the lead up to the release of ADSB or the mandate of ADSB. So you have been able to get that information. So even though you just have a Mode C, they're still rebroadcasting that. Now in the F-18, do you guys have ADSB in there? And what do you guys do for privacy? Obviously, you don't want people tracking your F-18s.
No, so we don't have ADSB, and that is a point that both military on both sides of the borders are, obviously the 2020 timeline for us was not something that we were going to follow. But there's civilian companies out there that are that have ADSB, and they need to turn it off for operational reasons. Anything that has to do with the homeland security or national security, they don't want to be broadcasting their location also. So there is a process within the FAA that you can apply to be able to discrete your Mode C or go anonymous and have it as a permanent structure within your operation that, whenever you're doing a certain type of operation, you can turn it off. But that's a formal request that you got to do through the FAA.
Yeah. I wonder if they allow that for the highway speed check airplanes. The people that monitor your speed. They better not. That would bother me.
Yeah, now you can watch them watch you.
So when you show up on radar on your F-18, what do you use for call sign? Like we show up as CF whatever, right? What do you show up as? I've never seen one of you on radar.
Yeah, so every squadron had a different set of call sign. You know, like 4-9 is Nightmare, Hitman, Cougars, and there's a lot of different call signs, Stalkers. So we don't have the F-18 doesn't use call sign like Canned Force. For instance, we use our own call sign that are associated with our units. So each unit, just like if you think of Air Canada or Speedbird or, you know, North Caribou, they all have their own kind of company call signs. We have the same. My company call sign is Cougar, and then each pilot within the unit has its own call sign. They gave me Cougar 3-3 just because for a French guy saying 3-3 is just tough. So,
Tree.
Exactly.
That's funny. Well, Brian, what do you think? Should we wrap it up about there?
Yeah, it's good. We've got about an hour behind us here, and it's been great talking to you, Eric. It's really interesting hearing about the F-18s and how all those operate.
Pleasure. And we even talked about ADSB and beautiful panels.
Yeah, we really appreciate your input on that kind of thing. It's good to hear from somebody who's recently upgraded what it felt like.
You know, it's funny because I mean, I've flown the F-18 and also being, you know, an active general aviation pilot, I can tell you that there's a lot of general aviation people out there that don't understand the luxury they have. Like it's an incredible privilege to have to fly those airplanes. And even when I go and fly a Cessna 172, or last year, I could not take off the smile from my face for 2 days after flying a Piper Cub. And you know, going back to the roots of flying and everything like this is awesome. So there's a couple of us military guys here that are active general aviation pilots, and it's kind of nice to go somewhere and meet like-minded people.
I agree. Those flying breakfasts that we had last year and none this year, unfortunately, are I have quite a lot of fun going there.
That's good.
Anyways, thank you very much.
Hey, pleasure, guys. Thanks very much for everything.
Thanks, Eric.